Hi, Rick. I'm excited to talk to you about the state of the world and our incredibly crucial role in
Always good to talk to you, Jenna.
it. So, as we are taking baby steps, cautious steps into 2021, it's hard not to think about how we're going to move forward as a team, individually, how our vehicles focused on so many different social areas, and then the larger Rethink Capital Partners family, how we're going to help support, redefine all that faces us as a country, as a people, as a world. And while I recognize that it's impossible for us to suggest that we're really going to be able to wave our magic wand and solve it all, I do know that you've had the insight many decades ago that so many people are coming to clarity with today, that there is a very important role for um, private institutions partnering with public institutions, the power of individuals and brands, the power of startup communities to make a real difference. So, as we take a step into 2021, I'd love to hear your thoughts about some of the key learnings that you have acquired with your expertise and time in the space for the past decade plus in impact investing. What are your thoughts? Where are we going? How are we going to do this?
It's a great question. So let me just give you some context around that. 20 years ago, when anybody would talk about issues in the world or philanthropy or social problems, all of that, we were saying it from a standpoint of American exceptionalism, truthfully. America can do things right. So we need to look out for all of these other behaviors that are happening in other countries, other parts of the world where things are not going well. And that's why there's a difference between what America is good at and what the rest of the world is. Um, Now, 20 years later, and COVID, among other things, comes in. And actually, we find out that the United States is not really very good at solving problems. In fact, we've been better at creating them by systemically incorporating into our models of things inherent inequities. And actually, we succeeded, not in spite of the inequities, but because we were able to create them. So now we're looking back at it 20 years later and saying, yeah, there these are problems that we did create, not that
Right.
we suffer from, but that we created them and we're living
Yeah.
with them. And now we've got to like unwind them. I was, talking to somebody earlier and just saying the interesting thing is all of the problems in the United States are self-inflicted.
That's right.
It's a very
This is our
unusual
mess.
situation.
Well, and it's definitely not the story we've been telling ourselves, right? And
No,
when you sit in an industry that has had extraordinary power and extraordinary influence and extraordinary ROI, it's been very easy not to look at these complicated truths, these ideas of how you prop up an economy, how you thrive and create prosperity and wealth, but how you can also make sure that you're meeting the needs of those at the bottom of the pyramid. And sadly, I think it's just going to continue to get increasingly clear that until we are taking care of everybody, we're not taking care of ourselves. I mean, you see it from climate to social justice to the discourse in our political space
you might
naturally.
also see it in whether you wear a mask or not.
And this pandemic, I mean, the pandemic, COVID is the most unifying human experience in history. There isn't a person on the planet who hasn't been touched or had some sort of life impact because of COVID. And, you and I are sitting in very blessed spaces. We have Wi-Fi, we have computer, we have the time and the bandwidth to explore concepts and to dive in to complicated areas, and then to sit here and actually be able to talk to it is an extraordinary privilege. But most of the people around the world right now, and then definitively in our own country, are very nervous about where their next meal is coming from. And as people of privilege, both from a race, gender, class, disability perspective, but also as folks who are part of a venture capital family that's looking to deploy resources to try to support and lift up, prop all of the different verbs, some of these social issues. Why have you decided to take your resources and your knowledge and your expertise and all the currencies that you have in the palm of your hand to solve some of this?
I think it's really, it sort of gets back to the existential issue that everybody has. What am I doing here? And during the period of time that I am part of this part of the world, what do I want to do? What do I like? What do I fear? And what do I want to leave for the next generations? That's, most people have that instinct to be moved. They just don't have the instinct then to care enough about it to commit themselves to move it forward in a way that's helpful. And I think, you're a perfect example of this. Maybe too perfect, in that you're moved by everything and you will stop at nothing. And that's because you know what can be done and what should be done. And it's hard for you to sit by and not do it when it's within your power to do that, to make things better, to make them right, and to point out why things are inequitable. This is not, we're trained so well to recognize this, and we're everything plays off of it, whether you're going to, church as a kid, or whether you're reading a book in freshman English. You've got to tap into all of that. Unfortunately, we don't sustain that, we don't maintain it, and then we don't make it our purpose to actually take those lessons, activate them, and apply it.
It's a uncomfortable position for you and I both to sit in, to say everyone's connected and we have a responsibility to give back, when we socioeconomically, racially, all of the different cards that we each hold in our hands, and specifically that we are both part of a company and an initiative that is well resourced to be able to sort of navigate the state of the world today within the constructs that have benefited us in ways that we can't measure, right? You see so many people starting to ask questions about concepts like capitalism or white supremacy or the patriarchy, and both you and I, unknowingly and now very much with our eyes wide open, are starting to think about how we're operating in a personal and professional way that might challenge some of those institutions. In some ways, I think we might be using some of those age-old institutions to benefit, whether it's that freshman reading the book, or the teams wearing the jerseys, or what it means to make sure that we're taking care of each other. But I wonder from a societal perspective if they're part of the resistance from folks not wanting to see what you and I are confronting in ourselves and our past is this absolute knowing that we are so dependent on each other. Right? Because we've been spending the past couple of decades, of course, recycling, but we don't necessarily see the waters rising. And of course, everybody wants everyone to have the same kind of opportunities, but we're still calling in favors for our kids' internships. This idea around of course, We want to make sure that women are paid the same amount as their male counterparts. But how do we actually measure that we're making sure we do that when we're up against our day-to-day success metrics and having wonderful LP partners and making sure that we're staying up to date on the headlines and also like dealing with our kids and our to-do list. And so this idea of like, how do we wrap our arms around that, to me, is the 2021 challenge of how do we wrap our arms around being one of the most successful impact investors on the market, having had extraordinary success in the past 10, 15 years, be it in education or women-founded companies, obviously as we're starting to contemplate how we're lifting communities out of poverty. And then the next chapter very much related to food, food distribution, food equity, food waste, which sadly, as we know, 30% of food is wasted. It's just a number that I can't quite process. But after the holidays, like as much as I saw come out of the refrigerator at the end, it was like, oh my gosh, that's that figure. But this idea of, you know, being one of the organizations that have been on the forefront of impact investing, and now the rest of the impact space, be it the big large institutions or the tiny VC firms, are now like, you know, tapping us on the shoulder, asking us what's our secret sauce. And do you have any to share?
Well, you know, I think one of the interesting things is that we have lived our lives thinking that life is a zero-sum game. And it has been part of our fabric in our country to believe that if somebody is gaining, somebody's losing, instead of saying how does elevating everybody help me, and what kind of world what is better for me, what happens if everyone has the same opportunities, what does that world look like? Not what happens if I have everybody's opportunity myself. What if everybody has opportunity? What if everybody is doing well? What if everybody feels like they're in it together? We know this. The great times in the world that we've always celebrated is when, not when everybody was doing well, but when everybody was doing poorly and had to come together and
That's right.
realize that they are dependent on each other. And when we all recognize that we're vulnerable, that's when we all recognize that we have to do something together to save each other and to live in the world that we want for ourselves, we want for our kids. And we want just to avoid that one emotion that we're all so familiar with because it's played on, I keep saying this, in the entertainment industry. We know what guilt looks like. We know what celebrating somebody else's life feels like. We know what being scared feels like. We just don't take it out of, as you keep saying, out of that part of our life that's for the extra time. We don't go back to like living our life, the purpose-driven life. And everybody wants to have a purpose-driven life. They just need the time to be able to do that, and they need to have the space to do it, the capacity to do it, and the support to do it. And if everyone is given that opportunity, then we will all we will be able to celebrate together, and we will be able to mourn together. We'll be able to take on challenges together, and we will realize that when everyone succeeds, that's the only time we will succeed. We've had this luxury of thinking that if we just took care of ourselves, then the world would take care of itself too. It's not true. And what we know now is that the world that we live in is dependent upon the incremental contributions of millions and billions of people.
Rick, you talk a lot about this greater responsibility that I think so many people are starting to wrestle with, and like what that actually means in our personal and our professional capacities. But if you think about how you've wrestled with that concept, which is not one that we're really going to be able to like dot that I, right? Like this is part of the human experience and, wrestling with legacy. But how and why did you choose to take your professional career and use it to work toward your personal greater responsibility? Obviously, I'm very grateful to be one of your team members, and you brought so many wonderful people and wonderful companies along with you. But why are you using the vehicle of your career to contribute?
What could be a better thing to do than making the world a better place and wanting that to happen, because that's the only thing that you know to do. Um, I think most of us do know that. We just don't have the opportunities. But once you actually have the opportunity to do something and you don't do it, I think you're just disappointing yourself. I'm not.
Absolutely. And
Anyway,
it also, for me, and it's a segue to sort of this next word that you and I use all the time in our conversations around authenticity, is that I've always found in my research and the work that I've done in the field that when people show up to participate in the comings and goings of the world, to suppress the desire to want to be a part of something bigger than themselves is suppressing that authentic desire to be in community and to be needed and to be seen, right? Like this everyone's just craving this, like, you see me, you see my challenge, you see what I can contribute. And I know that some of the things that you and I wrestle with most in our, more private, off the record conversations, as we're talking about something very on the record to share with so many of our friends. But this idea of how are we only making authentic decisions about the kinds of partners that we're looking for, the kinds of companies that we want to support, and really how do we constantly take that temperature of what's authentic?
I actually think it's not that complicated. I think it's the best thing. I think it's the best thing for the firm. I've always said this about investing and authenticity of investing. When we think about the human condition and the fact that business actually got created, it really wasn't. That was a social contract. That was, I may have even said this to you before. I needed something that you could do for me. And I was willing to give you something that you needed to, if you would do that for me. And it was a social contract. We realized that we were better off sharing with each other's skills or talents, reaching another level. And business was really created as a way to elevate everybody, give everyone a role, a purpose, and an outcome. That got over centuries totally bastardized into challenge of the world, is that it gives you every reason to lose track of your true north.
Particularly when you're in an industry that is so dependent on the exchange of money. I mean, obviously VCs grew out of opportunities to make wealth and to make, it's one of the quicker ways to accumulate wealth. And I mean, I know you could probably challenge that a little bit, but it is, it is a path to wealth creation. And so as you're sitting in an industry that is about wealth creation and then yanking what impact might potentially be, it's like you had the foresight that the only way, one of the ways to create social change, is also the redirection of this kind of currency. And people have, I think, gotten, the folks I know who are in the financial space are more focused with, the digits in their bank account than being comfortable and making sure, there'll be a planet for their future
It's
generations.
always been a mystery to me, Jenna. best thing to do with the dollar is to spend it in a way that gives the most leverage. You know, you can go back to these um, silly sayings that we learn to live with. You know, money is like fertilizer; it doesn't work unless you spread it around. And it, those become the kinds of things that you'll put on your, like a throw pillow on your couch, and make yourself feel good about it.
Is that how you decorate typically?
Typically, that's what I go
Needle pointed throw pillows?
for. Exactly. But we all live off of needle pointed throw pillows, and we live off of, I would say, everything that we learned. If we could just remember, you know, I know they say everything important I learned in kindergarten. I would say it was in fifth grade. The last time that you actually believed in um, the cause of the U.S., the idea of the U.S., that it was this land of opportunity, and we were given something sacred, and we needed to possess that, own it, and embrace it. Um, some of us didn't forget that. Some of us believed that and went with it.
Okay, so I'm going to try to push the idea like this. I'm going to say everything that you learned that was important was from Miss Arnold's first grade class. But
It was,
in, but this idea around, and I think so many people, myself in particular, have spent the past number of years really wrestling with what does it, like, what is this idea of the United States? Like, what is the story that we tell ourselves about who we are? And there's these messages around we're the land of the free and the brave, and yes, we've messed up and we've always tried to fix it, and you know, we elected a Black president, so racism is done. And you know, there's all of these kinds of messages that make us believe in this power, which is why it's so hard to burn a flag or to burn a dollar bill. But one of the challenges that we face as a nation, we face as a race, and surely we face as venture capitalists, is this idea that so many of those constructs have actually caused extraordinary harm, which we can now kind of measure in some ways, and in some other ways we can't, because it's just like it's too broad to, you know, what does poverty really mean, right? Like, what is,
I mean, I think that
and so this idea of like, as we're stepping into 2021, like we are as much part of the problem as anything, and so it's our responsibility to keep mining away to figure out the solution. And Rethink Capital Partners is closer to that solution because we've had the ups and downs, and we've been on the front lines with so many phenomenal entrepreneurs trying to tackle some of the nation's and world's largest challenges that, you know, we have to now question ourselves in different ways in 2021 that, I don't know, our success in the past is going to allow us to look at a little bit more closely. Rick, given the broad spectrum of social issues that we all face, I'm curious to know why you picked education in the beginning, and then understanding a little bit more about your thought as we've approached so many other crucial topics.
that how you start in the world is critical, and that there it's not what's it's what, not what you don't have, but it's what you don't have access to that matters. And education is clearly the first thing, other than probably a healthy breakfast, that you need to be successful in the world. We relied so much on charitable institutions to provide for other people what we weren't, what they weren't able to provide for themselves. That's one of the things that destroyed the country, that we separated. It was almost like the church and state separation. We separated the idea of philanthropy from the idea of actually building a system that worked for everybody, instead of just coming back and saying, "Oh, that didn't work for you. Well, here's your lunch money anyway, and now move on." We didn't create a system that worked for them. We created an opportunity for people who the system did work for to give money to people who it didn't work for, and they could maybe find their way. Education, for us was a great way that technology could then be used to change systems. Some of the other systems then you begin to look at is what can we do with our healthcare system? What if we tap a different set of entrepreneurs with different experiences and give them opportunities to solve the problems that they see? One of the great learnings that I've seen from watching our Rethink Impact efforts is that we always thought that financially it would be interesting to invest where nobody else was investing. There must be good opportunities investing in women because it's so hard for women to get funded, and they're so obviously knowledgeable and interested in creating businesses, but nobody will fund them. So, wow, you'd be ahead of the game if you just didn't have to compete with funders all the time. Well, it turns out that the great thing about investing in women is because they have ideas about an experience that half of the world has never had before, or I don't know what the right percentage is. Most of the world will never have, and that is that they saw the issues that affect women. There are a lot of issues that we ignore because we don't live them, we don't see them, and therefore we don't think they're important. When you look at what has been accomplished with companies that have been created by women, and they have addressed women's issues in a way that men were not capable of envisioning, we have made much more things possible and better because of that. We all know that the companies that work the best are companies that are the ones that are most inclusive, that take advantage of learning from every one of their employees and every one of their customers, and don't take for granted that the way you thought about business before you got into it is the way you have to think about it once you're in that business. And so many things came out of investing in through the Rethink Impact lens, tech and women, that address so many of the issues that are so important, whether it's healthcare or financial inclusion, family support. A lot of these things that didn't mean as much to us as we were talking earlier until everything was taken away, and until COVID came and made us all uncomfortable and made us realize that the old way of doing things was not a sustainable way, because it would not withstand any kind of challenges.
Right. It would not sustain any type of sustainability, which is why the ethos that is the foundation of the firm. And when we talk about making sure we're prioritizing the authenticity of our entrepreneurs, it's also a shared ethos with them, is that we are so committed to rethinking how capital can impact systemic inefficiencies, whether it's on the front lines of education, which, as you pointed out, is everyone's ticket, to specifically looking at how we're making investments through the gender lens, and not just related to gender parity, but huge opportunities for businesses to support demographics that are often not looked at by traditional investments, and then our very much outside the box hypothesis around how we can invest in specific zip codes, not just be it affordable housing or education, but tackling so many very specific lanes to make sure that entire zip code and the surrounding zip codes are lifted. And then specifically around food and the quantity of billions of human beings of which we're going to have to provide sustainable options for survival to. And obviously, you and I are excited about how we think about some of the new social issues that we're going to face, but that we can try to support. And we're, like I said, married to that authentic stance as we watch the market move toward this concept of impact, recognizing that there's ways to measure it, but there's also ways to not measure it. And it's a perfect way to summarize how you've said that it's about legacy. It's about being part of something and contributing something that's going to outlive you. And those kinds of things we'll never be able to put figures to, although we are a firm that is obsessed with numbers. But it is something that is at the core and is the backbone of Rethink Capital.
There are these fundamental things that we've done wrong as a country and as a world, and we have allowed these systems to grow for hundreds of years. And now we are realizing that these were all very obvious, but we're running out of the resources that we need. We're running out of the tech that we thought was the answer to everything applied improperly is actually more destructive of our democracy than anything we've ever could have imagined before. Our health system that we take great pride in is actually horribly inefficient in this country,
Yes.
and mostly because of the way we designed the system. Not because we didn't have the will or the money or the brains. We just designed a really bad system because we didn't really care enough.
There's twofold to existing in the world as a venture capital vehicle, because we're both looking at, of course, what's an ROI and how are we going to make sure that it's a worthwhile investment and company and entrepreneur and team to get behind, but also what are the measurable impact metrics that we care about, and then what's like the existential, where I'm pretty sure this is going to make a positive difference in the world, and constantly juggling and marrying it. And I think that our expertise in understanding where the boundaries are and where we shoot the moon is what makes us particularly qualified to step into this new year, but also continue to be leaders in the space.
I think that one of the things that I've realized with the whole Rethink initiative is we have a much more of a commitment to our investments because they matter. And the world has much more of a commitment to them because they matter. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that the entrepreneurs that we invest in have come up with ideas that the world needs, and therefore they are committed, and so are their investors, to making sure that those ideas see the light of day.
As an investor and as a firm, we know that those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, which is why when we raise the bar on the kinds of entrepreneurs and kind of businesses that we're investing in, that we're not just looking at what the bottom line is or the double or triple bottom line, but this idea that we need to make sure that those who have specifically been affected by those kinds of global challenges, national, from the super minute to extreme poverty, are those that are going to bring us closest to the solution, which is why we've been very diligent in making sure we choose the most authentic companies to invest in.
I agree. It's authentic companies. It's authentic experiences. We know what happens if we don't address COVID right away. Well, that's true if we don't address racism right away, too. It's no coincidence that the two things that came out of 2020 were those two movements, the idea of public health being important, and the idea of redressing our racial prejudices and our biases. All of those things are incredibly important to reset, or we've run out of time.
Well, if 2020 has shown us anything, is that those cracks in our systems that we thought we could just spackle over need to actually and potentially completely come down. And I'm so excited about our portfolio of companies that have been addressing them for so long, and to have you and the rest of the general partners and LPs behind all of them is going to make for hopefully successful social change.
Well, thank you. You know, I'm going to leave off with one of my favorite lines from Leonard Cohen, which is, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And that's what happens. There's a crack in everything, but the light gets in, and we will, with that light, we see what we need to fix.